Well, hello everyone, and
Hello.
welcome to another instantiation of the Jewish Book Club. I see new faces here. Very nice. So, the book we are reading is The Great Partnership Science, Religion, and the Search for Meaning for Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Oh, look at that. Beautiful, beautiful books all around. All right. Good job, everyone who completed the previous book club, and good luck to all of us on the newest one. So I guess one thing we can do before we get started is I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to run the kind of day and time poll again for everyone here. So as we see, poor people like Garth cannot be here all the time, but I linked in the public chat, and I also link in the private chat poll. If you just want to quickly fill that out to see what day and times we can have. If this is the time that works, good. If we come to an agreement of a different one, also good.
Cool. So what's the plan we said?
If you just want to fill it out, just to see if there's a better time for everyone, because I know we have newer people.
Okay.
And if not, if this is the best time, then we'll keep it.
Okay. Is New York this time now, or is it now, or
That's just Eastern Standard Time. So
it is
just
Eastern? Okay.
yeah, subtract how many hours you need for your time zone.
Sort by date.
Hello to the people in chat too. You can also vote on the straw poll, even if you're not in the video chat.
Do we want to just since we're all here, want to do this one like this first, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
You can do it too, Jacob, or have your friend fill it out for him.
Trey, he said this time seems to work fine because it'll let him get out of his community service he has to do. Keywords.
Okay. How am I voting? I don't know how I just voted or what I voted for. This time's
What
good.
I did, but okay.
I don't know.
I figure, the
Apparently
poll, we should also put it on the Discord, and then we'll figure it out the next time and post it.
For sure. I'll go. Should I put it in the book? I'll put it in the book club one too.
Yeah,
I'll redo it there.
and then we'll figure that out.
Okay.
I'm guessing most people are just going to
Okay.
for this time again because it's been the yeah.
All right. So everyone should have read the introduction in the first chapter. Were there any opinions on how we want to break down these sections, like 2 chapters a time, 3 chapters a time, by pages? There are about 13 more chapters left.
Yeah.
I like the idea of breaking it down by chapters. So if there's maybe, I don't know if two or my opinion would be 2 or less. I don't know, or unless they're really short.
I think it may be nice just to have a consistent number, some will be shorter, some will be longer.
Yeah.
Is 2 good, or does someone want to do more or less?
Gartham says 2. I don't know. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, it's about 20 pages, 15 pages average, I think, for one chapter.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
30 to 40 pages. Okay, we'll tentatively do 2 chapters.
2 works.
So then whenever the next meeting is, we'll do chapter 2, Into Minds, and chapter 3, Divergent Paths.
Yeah, let's see how far we get with this one
Yeah. Good idea.
today.
All right. So maybe we'll just do a quick little introduction. My name is Elijah. I'm, I guess, the leader of the book club. Thanks for coming. Oh, come on, Jacob.
That was Ben.
That was Ben. All right, next person. They get magnified. Ben, magnify yourself. Explain.
Explain myself.
Yeah, just introduce yourself so that everyone knows, and then.
Yeah, so I'm Ben. Come from a Jewish background, secular, but I'm learning more about Judaism and just philosophy, religion in general. So I'm really interested in all these things and how it connects to all the stuff that I've known about till now.
All right, Sandy. There you go.
Hey, my name's Sandy. I was in the first book club, and I come from a Christian background. Really been enjoying learning the things we talked about in the first one. I'm very much looking forward to this one. Doesn't tell you much, but
It's all good.
I'm Emma. I'm not Jewish. I'm Roman Catholic. But I just like learning more about like different religions, different things, and this book seemed interesting, so I'm jumping in.
Are you a trad cath or just a regular cath?
That's a really loaded question. I'm a fairly moderate Cath. I awkwardly occupy a space between trad Caths and charismatic Catholics.
Ooh.
So do you have a picture of Benedict XVI up or Francis?
I am very bad at putting pictures on my walls, so neither.
Oh, you're
The only pictures on my walls are put there by my mother-in-law.
There we go.
Caleb, get in here.
All right, blow yourself up, Jacob.
Caleb, Christian background, and I'm in LA, just chilling, visiting, and yeah,
Very good.
have not read the book or anything.
It's all good.
I'm Trey, Bob on the server.
Pop.
Yeah, Christian background.
I'm Jacob. I have a Christian-y background.
Sure. All right. Well, we can make things more egalitarian again, Jacob. You don't have to blow me up already. There we go. That feels so much better. Too much of my face. All right. Does anybody have a particular place or topic they'd like to start talking about? If not, we can always force Sandy to give us the first idea, like tradition dictates.
some traditions are allowed to change, you know.
Oh, also, Garth says in the comments that he's Garth and he pushes buttons.
Same.
He pushes buttons on actual machines that do things, not computers.
Oh,
Actually,
Ooh.
so he's actually useful. Well, that's
Mm-hmm. Garth is actually useful, and he's just
Oh,
a
hey.
computer guy.
You know, next day when you don't have an internet connection, blame it on me. Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, who is the author to y'all? Like, how do you guys know the author? I've only seen him pretty much in a conversation with Richard Dawkins. And that was a little tense. I don't know.
Yeah, Jacob, do you think you can give a little background?
Sure. So the only thing I actually read was the 2-page acknowledgement. I'm sorry, but so it's very interesting that the two people he mentions inspired him to become a rabbi were the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and the Rav, Rabbi Joseph. He calls him Dov Soloveitchik. It's actually Joseph Bear Soloveitchik, but like that's a whole other thing we could talk about. But Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, and he sat in the House of Lords. He was a figure that really straddled a lot of, I guess, what you could call modern Orthodox Judaism, but was highly respected in ultra Orthodox Haredi society as well. And yeah, he died recently, very young, of cancer. And so a speech of his, which I posted on the Discord, which I highly recommend, was when he spoke to the Kinnis HaShlochem, which is the annual Chabad convention of rabbis, about his experiences with the Rebbe. And yeah, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I mean, he was probably one of the best known Orthodox rabbis in non-Orthodox circles, and in non-Jewish circles. And in his speech, that was one of the things he said that the Rebbe really encouraged him to recognize that he was a rabbi not just for the Jewish community in the United Kingdom, but also for the Gentile community as well. And so he did a bunch of radio shows, and he's got a pretty good website still. I mean, his office still runs his website, so you can find more stuff on him through the radio show than just most YouTube conversations, although he did a bunch of those as well.
He also published a Siddur with Koren, right? There's the Koren Sachs Siddur. So
Correct,
What
yes.
does that mean?
Oh, so a Siddur is a Jewish prayer book, and because England has particular traditions, they published a prayer book to be used in the United Kingdom. And I think he was still chief rabbi at the time. He might not have been, even after he was no longer the chief rabbi. He probably overshadowed Rabbi Mervis, who is the current chief rabbi of the United Kingdom.
all right. Very good. Thank you, Jacob. All right. So who would like to start?
I'm just gonna say honestly, I really only hung out in the introduction.
That's okay.
I nominate Emma to say something because she hasn't.
And
Well, because I haven't said anything. I'm really interested in this contrast he draws between ancient Greece as a place of tragedy and ancient Israel as a place of hope. I had never thought about it that way before. And I've done a lot of thinking about Athens and Jerusalem.
So Rabbi Yosef was plus a translation of the Tanakh. So yes, there's a translation of the entirety of the Jewish Bible, a weekly radio show on BBC, which I mentioned, and a long chavruta with King Charles. And chavruta is a paired learning, Jewish traditional paired learning, and apparently, so he on a weekly basis, I guess, or maybe monthly, spent time with King Charles III.
Wow.
Oh, that-
Yeah, where does he mention yeah, he says that about the tragic cultures.
Hmm.
Um, there's something at the end there.
It's sort of woven throughout the introduction.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yosef said that they learned the Guide to the Perplexed by Maimonides and some of what is usually translated as the Rabbinic Bible, which is the Bible with traditional Jewish commentaries.
oh. This is kind of an aside, but I was re-listening to the Peugeot and Vervaeke talk from Chino today, and got sort of the point where they were talking about the three. Was it? Oh, the only thing I'm fixating on right now is the word hope, because that was the one Vervaeke said he had the most difficulty with. So when
Oh yeah, the 3 theological virtues, right? Faith,
Mhm.
hope, and love.
I don't think so, but that's where my mind is going out of habit. So
Mm-hmm.
it might be hope and love.
I listened to the first half of that
I
this
thought
evening,
one of them
but I
was
didn't finish it.
Yeah. But I was intrigued with your comment on tragedy and hope, because just what I was listening to, I was curious what hope is with it, especially what hope is within the Jewish context then, that given also the levels of tragedy and things that have been experienced, why is that the dominant thing mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he tied that into that, but don't remember. But I mean, it reminds me of the kind of like the discussion about repentance, in terms of like even if something tragic happens to you, that's not the end of the story. The idea of repentance is to recreate yourself, or recreate or use these things to elevate yourself even more, or yeah, like create new meaning through those things.
So Trey pointed out on bottom of page 10, that's where he talks about it. Throughout the book, it may sometimes sound as if I am setting up an either-or contrast. In actuality, I embrace both sides of the dichotomies I mentioned: science and religion, philosophy and prophecy, Athens and Jerusalem, left brain and right brain. This, too, is part of Abrahamic spirituality. People have often noticed, yet it remains a very odd fact indeed, that there is not one account of creation at the beginning of Genesis, but two, side by side, one from the point of view of the cosmos, the other from a human perspective. Literary critics, tone deaf to the music of the Bible, explain this as the joining of two separate documents. They fail to understand that the Bible does not operate on the principles of Aristotelian logic, with its either or true or false dichotomies. It sees the capacity to grasp multiple perspectives as essential to understanding the human condition. So always in the chapters that follow, read not either or, but both and.
Yeah.
Good point.
So Ben, I asked a really awkward question for sorry, I'm ignoring my phone. Paul put out from PBK put out a Friday morning Q&A thing, and I asked a really awkward question there from something at Chino on repentance, because one of the speakers stated it, but said it in I'm gonna turn the sound off on that. There. Oh goodness, said it in an emphatic repent, or something. They were making a point, and I didn't get it. But my question then went to that place when we were in Halakhic Man, about sort of how God contracts himself. So I'm just, as I listen through tonight, I'm curious why you brought repentance up, and just kind of, that's where my mind was today while reading. Because I always thought of that as, well, obviously I thought of it from the Christian context because that's what I was trained in, but I'm learning different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just connecting that, it just brought to mind because it was connecting to the hope aspect.
The hope, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know that most people would think, well, no. I don't think that a lot of non-Jewish people necessarily would connect hope and repentance that smoothly, kind of just moving from one to the other. Like I haven't heard that happen other contexts.
It's so funny. I was talking to Yosef earlier today about the conference and stuff, and I was saying I think part of what was so frustrating to me that I ended up screaming. Ben was sitting next to me at the
Me and Donnie going like this.
repentance, and Paul didn't understand what I was saying because he's a Calvinist and he doesn't understand repentance. That's what repentance affords you, is hope, right? It that even though you made mistakes in the past, that doesn't doom you to forever be at the same, and repentance makes it possible to continue with life, and that's what I think John Vervaeke is missing the most when he says he doesn't want to live forever because he thinks that would just be crushing, because I think he doesn't understand that repentance turns your sins into wisdom.
I like that sentence.
I was just going to mention that above what Jacob read, before it says, but a culture that sees the universe as blind and indifferent to humanity generates a literature of tragedy, and culture that believes in the God of love, forgiveness, and redemption produces a literature of hope. There was no Sophocles in ancient Israel. There was no Isaiah in ancient Greece. And I had no idea who Sophocles is, so I looked him up. And he wrote Oedipus and Antigone. And all I know is that Oedipus is kind of a sad story about a man sort of like wanting to kill his father and, make love with his mother. So not really cool,
He wrote tragedies. Yeah. He's one of the three great tragedians of ancient Greece. Sorry, this is my thing. So if you don't mind.
Sorry, it's great to have somebody. You have a master's in the classics, right?
Oh, right.
Or you're getting one?
Yes.
So you are going to be our classicist here.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I already learned a new word, tragedians.
Tragedians, yeah.
Tragedians, great.
I'm actually interested in why he picked Sophocles and not one of the others, although I guess Sophocles was probably the most popular and the best. But yes, Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King, is the story of a man who was, when he was born, he was prophesied that he would kill his father and marry his mother. And so he was exposed on a hillside, but as always happens in these stories, a kindly shepherd found him and took him in so he didn't die. So the prophecy ended up happening despite, efforts to avoid it. And the play specifically focuses on the fallout of this. By the time the play starts, he's already killed his father without knowing who he was, and married the queen of this town that he found and saved from a monster, who happened to be his mother. So completely by accident, while everybody was trying their hardest to avoid it, he ended up killing his father and marrying his mother. And the play specifically is about him finding out that this happened. And basically everybody ends up committing suicide out of the shame and horror of what happened.
Sounds very good to me. Jonathan a while back said, Chapter 1, the meaning of the system lies outside the system.
Yeah.
This was a theme throughout Chapter 1. Monotheism was not just the distillation of polytheism down to one God, but a qualitative difference. And I have to shout myself out here. Jacob, the prophet, yelling repentance at the crowds. And we have Chad in the house. So.
So I have another question. So he mentions saying that the idea of believing Genesis 1 and 2 are like sort of the idea of the documentary hypothesis, right? And I guess it comes to the question of like, do you think he can be successful in this project? Because in a certain sense, he's saying like science, you may have some theories about the Bible, but I'm going to push back on that and say no. So I guess I'd be interested to see what you guys think.
Do you?
So this is actually. Oh, sorry.
There you go, Emma.
This is actually something I have to deal with like every semester because my myth, I TA for myth, and the myth professor talks about this documentary hypothesis, and I always struggle with how much I'm gonna like explain alternate explanations to the students.
Wait, what's the documentary? Can you just like quick?
It's the idea that there were two different four. For the creation myth, two of them are relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Different texts that were like combined together to make Genesis.
Okay.
Sir James Fraser is the one that at least we always talk about as like presenting this and discussing it.
Okay, so Rabbi Yosef
Okay.
has to say, no, this isn't the documentary hypothesis. The idea that the two chapters are two different perspectives is 200 years old, though popularized by Rabbi Brewer about a century ago. I mean, there has been. Okay, this is what kills me about any of these discussions. People seem to think, oh, for thousands of years, people who based their entire life on this book didn't notice that there are two creation narratives. And it's like, no, people have been noticing this from the very beginning. And I think that's why I loved when he said it's like tone deaf to the whole concept of the Bible to be like, oh, hey, it reminds me of William Lane Craig and his coming up with a new theory of the Trinity. It's like, you really think after 2,000 years you came up with something new that's gonna fly? Like, it just takes a bunch of chutzpah, and a lot of these hypotheses, like, I'm sorry, it's just chutzpah. That's all it is. Audacity.
Right. I think that. But I think I just want to mention the idea of a lot of, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of academics would agree with this hypothesis, or at least some semblance of it. And the rabbi sort of saying, no, you can't go there. And I guess my question is that a fair play when he wants to have this sort of combination of science and religion?
So my question to you is, why do you think literary criticism is science? That is, can you just define what science is to me then?
Yeah, that would be a good point. I don't think I'd have a definition that we could really prod in with what science.
You can just give me like a general, like just like what do you feel like is what feels like science and what feels like not science?
Yeah. Refining proposals of reality, I guess. That'd be my best idea of what science is.
Okay. And so what makes like just something like purely in the realm of like ideas, so that has no connection to like the physical world? Is that science then, or no?
Jonathan says literary criticism is witchcraft. I have to agree.
Better be kind to Emma, then apparently she has that skill.
Yeah, I mean, Elijah, I think
I'm not particularly a literary criticism type.
Okay.
I was gonna say that. I mean, I think this is a good question to just keep in mind as we continuously read this, because I think he points out the fact that even people, or what you would call the new atheists in the introduction, especially, are confused about what science is meant to do. Explanation versus interpretation. So is one example of that, but I'm sure that will be like a theme that continues through it. So the definition of what science is, a method versus a worldview versus whatever else, I think is apt. But it's hard to. I think it's not clear. It's kind of like one of those ambiguous terms, or what's the term that wishy-washy, or I don't know. Like it's people don't have the same thing in mind when they say science.
Yeah, it's slippery.
Well, I'm not sure.
I mean, I think
Caleb says it's a word that fudges, and I think he's right.
Fudges, yeah, okay, that was.
Well, I think that at least in the Anglo tradition, science is what we used to call natural philosophy. So science is an attempt to explain, things in the physical world. And this is where we kind of have the distinction between soft science and hard science, right? So soft science would be something like sociology, where there's no, you can't really go out and test these things. But if you, drop an apple, you can test that. So that's kind of the usual definition. But Germans have a different idea called Wissenschaft, and that usually incorporates everything, soft sciences and hard sciences. So
yeah, so that actually connects to the other thing that I wanted to bring in from the introduction too, that he talks about how treating people as things dehumanizes them. He mentions it somewhere in page 3.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, so I think that's the scope creep in terms of science, where you say science is about the physical world, it's things we can observe, but then with neurology we can observe thoughts. Maybe with dreams, is that physical? It's not necessarily. Now it's physical, or we can find the physical correlate to it. But that kind of creeps into.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, that creeps into this idea of it just reminds me of the abolition of man that talks about it too, of how that creeps into the soul, the idea of a soul, holiness, and stuff like that.
So I think I hung out in the introduction because I was really trying to get my mind around this part of it before jumping into what he was saying he was going to talk about in each of the parts. So I was making notes, pulled my journal out, looking at how he's contrasting and yet not contrasting in a negative sense, science and religion. Some of the things, like he said, science speaks with expertise about the future. Religion with authority about the past, with authority of the past. And science invokes the power of reason, religion, the higher power of revelation. Those things kind of had me pondering especially when I got through to that spot. And when I think it was, I've written page 3 laughter, so it must have been page 2 or something. I wrote a whole bunch of stuff out just verbatim, but then I said, Rabbi Sachs tells us that our brain's ability talks about a brain's ability to do 2 different things. One being the ability to break things down into their constituent parts, which I thought he was likening to a lot of the role of science, sort of that pulling things apart to look at them. And the other being joining people together, which really ties into that thing that I'm seeing him talking about religion's authority, speaking with authority of the past, and about revelation, that place where you connect things again. And we've that came up, I think, a lot too in when I was following up on notes from Chino, and I'm just I've got way too much going on in my brain, but I really think that there's something he's saying about why we don't pick one over the other and why both are necessary, and coming down to that, what is it? The sum is greater than, or the whole, what's that saying about being greater than the sum of the parts? It's not just.
Yeah, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, when you allow them to appropriately interact, something amazing happens. Like, he keeps saying he's going to defend his idea that they're both necessary or both relevant to who God is and what he did.
We briefly had Ryan in here for all of 2 seconds, but he's from Australia and he speaks Korean and he's a Noahide. Gartham says, I think Sachs described science pretty well in the book. Science is the dissected analysis of reality as it can be observed and measured. Jonathan agrees, and then Yosef said, I would just add, measured in a repeatable, reliable way. It dissects things, but then tries to tie them to statistical, measurable patterns. And Garth says, science and logic dissects, religion and culture integrates. I believe Ian McGilchrist makes this same point. And Rabbi Sachs was definitely influenced by Ian McGilchrist.
Well, he mentions him in the introduction too, or at least acknowledges him.
I don't know if it's for sure relevant, but Rabbi at the conference, Rabbi talked about, crazy surprised me, but he was talking about how theology is the most important epistemology or whatever going forward. And so it that kind of struck me as like the opposite angle of what Sachs is doing.
I mean, I haven't read
the opposite side.
Book. I don't know if it's the opposite angle. I
think he's religious and he's squaring from being housed in to where Verbeeke's doing the same, but from the other side.
Right. Yes. I think that's part of the flipping of society that's going on, where there was a time when we recognized theology as the queen of the sciences. Somebody's echoing.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was you, Emma. Sorry. And then in the Enlightenment, we started having this complete idea that, oh, no, it's science over superstition, and to the point where you get the deists and the atheists who think, oh, religion, and then the materialists who think anything that's spiritual is hocus pocus. And I think we're going back to a recognition that, in fact, God always has to be at the top of the hierarchy.
I have a question. Does that relate to also on page 3, just before the bit Ben mentioned about how you treat people was, anyway, it says, I made a note, when you treat things like people, you have myth, so therefore you get light comes from a sun god and rain comes from a sky god and things like that. Where he was likening it a lot to in the times when people would tell stories to make sense of things. And then he was saying, excuse me, in the other side, science was born when people stopped telling stories about nature and instead observed it. But a lot of, when you talked about it being flipped, Jacob, a lot of what I'm hearing now in things is that people are talking about the importance of story again. Is that somehow related to why you were talking about a flip, or?
Well, I mean, especially in our little corner, we've definitely been talking about kind of the narrative and poetic, and I think Jordan Peterson also has kind of been talking about narrative as being religious. I actually don't think that I don't think that's a proper way of looking at theology. Narrative contributes to theology because theology is not limited to the propositional. And so I think it's two separate things that's going on, which is we are rebelling against the propositional tyranny, which requires more attention to the poetic and narrative. And we're also rebelling against the tyranny of the materialist while trying to stay away from the Gnostic. And I actually think those are on two different axes, but because we're doing both at the same time, I personally think it's mixing two different things.
So I think I want to propose something maybe else along the same lines in terms of why narrative is becoming more important, or I would say maybe like what Sachs says about meaning or purpose and something that's outside the system, and how that's something that maybe the fact that I'd say the West has run on the fumes of some sort of narrative with a certain purpose, but now we can see different groups going into these weird their own weird narratives of what progress might mean. Then we're starting to think, oh shit, the narrative wasn't like it wasn't explicit enough, right? So Sachs has a quote, the prophet, let me see where it was, in page 31. The prophets believed history was a drama, but was a drama of redemption. For Christians, it was about salvation. For the heroes of the Enlightenment, it was a narrative of progress. These are not disagreements about the facts of history. They are disagreements about the interpretation of the facts of history. So there has to be an interpretation. There has to be meaning to history. And I think what we're realizing is that it was implicit for a lot of us that we've put that interpretation, or this interpretation was, was gifted to us from our parents. We inherited that interpretation, but now people are taking it into these weird places, so we need to make it explicit again. That makes sense?
Can you just say what you think needs to be explicit again?
The purpose, like, so if, for example, Enlightenment mentions history as progress, again, progress towards what? Or, right? So we have, what we're trying to make explicit is we call it narrative, but the narrative as some kind of like, as a telos, I guess, as a meaning, has a purpose. All these things are kind of like connected. They're connected somehow. And I think that is like, there is some idea of how society had an implicit telos to it in the West, but now because we've discarded a lot of the theology, different telos are starting to creep in, and people are realizing that, oh, like we don't have the same story in mind, even the basics. So we need to make it explicit again.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some of that, like, how does a country get along if you believe fundamentally different things? At least in politics, you see that. But I think there's also something else with regards to nihilism. Hello, hopefully you can stay on this time, Ryan. One of the things for like Camus is absurdism, where like life is absurd, and then whatever, like somehow you have meaning, like, meaning ex nihilo from absurdism. But then I just watched a video kind of about, it was like a film critique thing, and they said like, oh, postmodernism like brings about nihilism, but then we have something called like metamodernism, which is to me, it just seemed like recycled absurdism, where you have like nothing matters, but then somehow like because nothing matters, we have meaning. And I think that
Right.
in some ways, the problem is that you can only repeat that cycle so many times. Like, right, so 100 years has gone by and absurdism is like the best thing we've got again. And I think that what happens is then like people are like, well, this doesn't seem to be fulfilling. Like I can't, I just don't know if you can truly live where nothing matters and somehow that means you have matter.
Well, if I may butt in, you are a clown though. Like that is what I mean by that is that's the definition of what absurdism is to be placed in an environment which you are separate from. And I think it's more than just like a creation ex nihilo. I think it's a sort of battling and immersing yourself the weirdness of life. I do think it's a story. I don't think it's the best, but I think you are sort of embodying that story right now, having the clown hat. Well, none of us else does,
Yeah. Maybe the problem is that implicit in that is the assumption that there is purpose and that the clown is merely trying to find the purpose. But the idea of absurdism is that nothing actually does matter. And so you're not finding it, you're making it, right? Because when you say there's a quest, there's like implicit within that is that you think meaning is out there. But to an absurdist, there is no meaning.
Right.
There is no purpose. It's just nothingness, and you make it. So there's no quest.
Well, the sex. Yeah, sorry. No, I was just gonna say that sex. I'm trying to find this, but he talks about this, and he gives this quote, and he says like the move that they're making, they're trying. The absurdism is just getting to this ground floor, which is the same move. Like you can just say say the same quote with just like God, and it will be the same. You will get to the same ground, but they come from it from a perspective of despair. Like there's nothing, so we need to create our own thing. Right? It never ends. Also, like the nihilism, like even with the absurdism, it's not like there's nothing, and then it stops there. There is something about like from there. Where's that quote that he was mentioning it? I think Bertrand Russell or somebody. Of like how from there you can build your meaning from there.
I think you're on the
Is
bottom.
that in chapter 1?
No, he said
The Russell quote?
That's on this page facing where Ben mentioned here.
Okay, he quotes him again in chapter 1.
I don't know where it was.
Yes. 26.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
26.
The firm foundation of unyielding despair.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, do you want to quickly say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi all. Sorry for the popping in, popping out. My microphone stuff just wasn't having it today. I'm from Australia, as you can probably tell by my accent. And I'm an old hat, so I'm glad to join you all today.
Nice, welcome.
Welcome.
And this is proof that miracles are real because he has not fallen off the other side of the globe.
Not yet, anyway.
So Trey here wanted to insult
No.
Noahides.
No, I said Noahides are an example of absurdism. I think.
How are they an example of absurdism?
I think especially on Australia, I would say. You're in an environment that is totally foreign to you, right?
There's actually a large Noahide community in East Asia for some reason. I don't know why. I have zero clue why, but like the Philippines and Australia are like two of the largest Noahide communities. That and Texas.
Texas.
I
Yeah,
said,
that then becomes the why Texas.
I mean, I can kind of see it because you've got a lot of like rah America Christians who then get sort of disillusioned with all of it and are looking for something else that's not like too far away.
Well, the Noahide movement originally started with Jews for Jesus backfiring spectacularly against the Southern Baptists. So, yeah, that's
So
why.
wait, did a whole bunch of Baptists become like Noahides?
Well, okay, so what happened was that the Baptists thought a good way of evangelizing to Jews would be to create ethnically relevant churches which had Hebrew and Jewish traditions and Jewish music and all that, but it was just a church, right? And
Mhm.
so they created Jews for Jesus, and they created these churches that almost no Jews went to, but a bunch of Gentiles went to. And they liked it so much, they ended up rejecting the Trinity in Christianity, and large numbers converted to Orthodox Judaism, and large numbers started the Noahide movement. So it backfired spectacularly.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from Ryan's perspective then, because I had friends that were missionaries long time in Papua New Guinea and throughout Indonesia. Their one son's still there. So what's different between Jacob's story about here in the West and in the East?
So Jonathan says quite hilariously, Australian Noahides don't convert so they can throw another shrimp on the Barbie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's really any difference, to be honest with you. Like, because the thing is, most of like when you learn about Noahides and you're learning about that sort of thing, you're getting it from the people from America anyway. So it's you all influence each other. So I mean, it's not like I don't think it's any different.
Yeah, Australia I don't think is very different. The Philippines ones, there are whole churches both in the Philippines and in South America, and I think even sub-Saharan Africa, that the pastor became a Noahide and brought the whole church with him. So
Poor
Or to
Emma's just
become
hearing about this
Catholic.
apostasy, and she's dying over here.
Well, he said pastor. They probably weren't Catholic. It's not. I'm not convinced it's that much
Okay,
worse.
there's the trad cat now.
So they're Protestant, so they were Christian anyway.
They were Christian, but
Hey, we were talking about a book, right? Like,
Well, I grew up Catholic, so this stuff.
you're not healthy.
Jonathan, yeah, we should get back to the book. But Jonathan grew up Protestant, became a Catholic, and now is a Noahide. And he went
that is really interesting.
to Calvin University, which will
That is really interesting.
Servetus University. I guarantee you, in the future, Calvin University will be renamed Servetus University.
Why?
Back to the book. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of Jacob's many tangents.
So should I read the quote that he mentions and how he changes it?
Yes,
That-
please.
Yeah. Okay. That man is the product. So this is Bertrand Russell talking about not necessarily absurdism, but the atheist perspective. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes and his fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. That all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. And that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's salvation henceforth be safely built. And Sachs says this is very beautiful, and then he just changes this a little bit, and he says the same quote but a little differently. So this is from Sachs. The man, despite the product of seemingly blind causes, is not blind. That being in the image of God, he is more than an accidental collocation of atoms. That being free, he can rise above his fears, and with the help of God, create oases of justice and compassion in the wilderness of space and time. That though his life is short, he can achieve immortality by his fire and heroism, his intensity of thought and feeling, that humanity too, though it may one day cease to be, can create before night falls a noonday brightness of the human spirit, trusting that though none of our kind will be here to remember, yet in the mind of God, none of our achievements is forgotten. All these things, if not beyond dispute, have proven themselves time and again in history. We are made great by our faith, small by our lack of it. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding hope, can the soul's salvation be safely built.
Garth says, I agree with Sachs that Russell's statement is the most honest statement of atheism that you can have.
Yeah, and I've had friends. I have a very good friend that also would quote Camus, and he would say, I'm so relieved now. Like now I can make, like, it makes so much sense. I don't have the pressure of like, it's absurd. It doesn't make sense. And so that's why I'm like, it sucks sometimes. And now I can figure out what's meaningful for me. So it's like, as some kind of grounding it has some, so.
Well, I mean, that brings me back to Garth's metamodernism sounds something like the Ubermensch. Like we have to recreate, like Death of God. We have to create our own God.
Yeah. So actually, I had a question about this. So I would love to hear what people think about, so Sachs points out about Nietzsche and talking about how the death of God leads to the alternative with it, which is the will of power, and that gets us into nihilism. My question is, does that naturally, does it have to go that route? Like, isn't there a more optimistic way that it can go? Like, I mean, I know I'm asking about a script, but I'm just trying to figure this out. Like, is there another option that could be relevant, that could make sense, be logical at least a little bit?
I mean, I don't really think the will to power naturally leads to nihilism. I do think it could lead to some bad places. Like when I think of the will to power, I think of nationalism. I think that's also another alternative on the table. I mean, there's also like creating your own meaning as well. I think it's just like, can you involve yourself in a process that removes the surroundings? And I think nationalism is a good way to do that, or something else.
Can you imbue yourself with a process that improves the surroundings? You said
Improves the surroundings.
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh yeah, I would say that the will to power usually leads to nationalism because you need to surround yourself in something that's going to make you forget the reality of the situation. And if you're so focused that you have this goal, this very hard goal, we need to pretty much centralize everything or anything like that. You're completely focused on that goal, making everything sort of move away. I don't know if that made sense, but
I actually think it makes a lot of sense with what Ben and I were talking about before this, in the idea that when you find your place in something much larger than yourself, you stop thinking about yourself, and it doesn't matter what your place really is, just as long as you've found a place for yourself. And so I think people who end up with nationalism are just kidding themselves, because the nation becomes their god, something else becomes their god. And this idea of the secret sacred self, which can tell you what you really want, it just doesn't work. It just you end up asking yourself, what can you fool yourself with? And you fool yourself with all kinds of things.
Well, you fool yourself with all kinds of things. Other people fool themselves, and everybody's like, it's hard to get alignment if it's coming from so many different places. And then there's nothing objective is going to be I don't know if it's the right word. There's nothing objective that everybody can, again, use the word align them toward. Which might be related to the meaning is outside the system. Again, the meaning is, it's like there's something outside the system that needs to align individuals inside the system. Otherwise, they'll eat each other.
I think in some ways what people who have the will to power kind of understand is that if nothing is meaningful, then your individual preference, let's say for nationalism, let's say for communism, let's say you fight for rights, let's say you take away rights. Because nothing is meaningful, all of those positions are, let's say, equal on some sort of arbitrary playing field, right? That they're no more justified than anything else. Therefore, the only thing that exists is the will to power. Because there's no measure, like you said, there's no objectivity to give one precedence over the other. All that can exist is you exerting your power over somebody else's position. So I don't think that in a nihilistic system there is anything other than will to power, because that's all that there can be.
Yeah. Just say one more thing about that, just to respond to that. I agree with that, but I'm curious because if I just think about like right now, like people, the culture doesn't necessarily seem nihilistic to me. It seems like people are looking for meaning, or they would say looking for meaning. Like meaning is there. People mention it, but again, there is the lack of the objective. It's something outside the system. So it's like, it's almost like it's like nihilism that's hidden. Like, you know what I mean? It's like nobody says I'm nihilistic, like especially in the culture here. Like maybe like the culture is not like, oh, we're nihilists. It's more hopeful, at least in the way it expresses itself, right? Or in those nice words. But there is the hiddenness of what you just explained in terms of nihilism. It just is still the same pattern.
No, I think it's because nobody wants to embrace it, right? Like people want, like as Jonathan Sachs talks about, people want that. People are searching for meaning. So even if their worldview doesn't incorporate it, like many of we're seeing in society today, they still want it, and they'll still try to create it. They'll still try to do whatever they can to bring it in, even though they haven't yet realized that their worldview just simply doesn't allow for meaning to be brought in from the outside at all. They can't, but they'll still try. They'll still try. God forbid, they'll still try. But they because they can't live like when you hear about the people like in today's political framing today, everyone's talking about moral issues, right? That's all we talk about today, right? It's like trans rights or whatever it is, right? And these are all moral issues. So but we're talking like it's real, right? It's objective, but many people don't think it's real and objective, and they'll admit that if you press them, but they still act it out, right? They're still doing the performance, whether or not they agree with it, they're still doing it. They're still actors on the stage.
Believe the science, Ryan. Believe the science.
Yeah, there's
The science.
a propositional rejection of religion, yet there's not a replacement with something that can be lived in. And so it's there's a fantasy world that a lot of people are living in. Totally.
I have the perfect quote. It's by Francis Schaeffer. He says, "Modern man resides in a two-story universe. In the lowest story is the finite world without God. Here, life is absurd. In the upper story are meaning, value, and purpose. Now, modern man lives in the lower story because he believes there is no God. But he cannot live happily in such an absurd world. Therefore, he continually makes leaps of faith into the upper story to affirm meaning, value, and purpose, even though he has no right to, since he does not believe in God."
That kind of reminds me of the whole spiritual but not religious thing too.
Also, the religion that's not a religion. Ben, to answer your question of like what's the hopeful side of it, Vervaeke's whole project is what comes to mind.
Yeah.
Of the attempt to bypass nihilism, yet still not abide by the traditional kind.
But you end up with performative contradictions.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Which
that.
you can't live with.
Yeah, so I mean, this, like, I'm just fascinated how this is like. I know we can talk political and stuff, but like, I'm fascinated. You just said like Vervaeke, but like jujitsu, there's people that are so into jujitsu. That's what people are trying to do with meaning, and so there's so much. I can go, like, so I go to a jujitsu gym. There are competition that I can go with friends. That's like similar to a conference in Chino. I'm a product manager. I have a community on Slack, just like Discord, and there's meetups all over the place, and I can host a meetup. It's the same thing with a conference. So there's these little pods of meaning that everybody, like are doing all these things, and they're creating these communities. It's not in itself, it's not bad, but I think the thing where it comes, where this becomes relevant, and I'm really fascinated by how Sachs is gonna talk about this, because where it becomes relevant is in the societal level, because individuals within themselves are trying to figure this out, and they're going to a jiu-jitsu gym, they're in that culture, they go, I don't know what else, right? I'm just bringing stuff from my own experience, which is many other things, but it doesn't translate to maybe it translates to the political, but there's like a level beyond that maybe that's like the globalist, right? People are trying to push that, but there's no, I guess at the end you'll get somewhere, but it's just fascinating.
An irony of it as well is that it's also a blessing or a grace from God that there is this fantasy world that everyone's living in.
Yeah.
Because if everyone did embrace nihilism fully, it would be hell. It would be crazy. So it's a weird situation in that regard, that it's kind of beautiful that it is that way for now. Like, until we figure it out, at least there's this fantasy land that's holding things together.
Well, in the places we didn't have the performative contradictions, we ended up with the killing fields and the Holodomor and the Holocaust and right.
Yeah.
People who actually took it to its logical conclusion, became fascists and socialists and Marxists and murdered a bunch of people. Because why not?
I think even Sachs says this on the bottom of page 32. Life without meaning is a fearful prospect. Albert Camus, who believed that there was no meaning and that life is absurd, argued in the myth of Sisyphus that the fundamental question of philosophy is, why should I not commit suicide?
And honestly, like that's the nice way of asking it. Why shouldn't I commit suicide? The real question is, why shouldn't I commit homicide? That's the real question. Like, anytime an atheist tells me I can be moral as an atheist, I ask them, okay, why don't we just liquidate the prisons the way that the Nazis did? We could take all the people who are on death row and chop them up for parts. Like, there are people who need all the body parts, right? Like kidneys, heart, liver, right? So why don't we just chop them up for parts? Like, what? Give me a reason, an atheist reason why we shouldn't do that. And I don't think there is one.
And that's why you need theology, because you need to explain that to AI.
Yeah.
Because AI needs to figure out if, okay, you're telling me to optimize the prison system. Okay, chop them up. And yeah, so okay, if not, you need to give me a reason for why not do that. I think that's his point. For Ricky's point about theology.
Totally.
But,
Why shouldn't I? Gar says, why shouldn't I commit self-homicide?
I enjoy your comments, Garth. So that's one reason.
Jonathan says, spiritual, not religious, usually just means following our secret, sacred Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara is Hebrew for evil inclination.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I guess another question to pose is to sort of steel man their side. Why don't we see Sweden, or we see very secular countries, why don't we see them sort of falling, in a sense? Could we sort of could we tell these stories in an atheistic manner and still have the same results, sort of like Sweden or something like that?
I mean, I think that there was something we talked about earlier where I kind of mentioned this idea of hauntology from Derrida that I kind of borrowed. And it's just, I think he mentions it like, there's this, he kind of brings it from Marx, where Marx has this famous phrase, like there's a specter haunting Europe and that specter is communism or something like that. And he says that, Derrida, anytime you try to mention like, hey, maybe like we shouldn't let poor people die, they're like, that's communism. And people don't actually make like, let's say, a rational decision right now, as in like, well, is it really communism to not want people to die? Like, that seems a little absurd. And I also take this in some ways for our modern societies, as in how much of the meaning that we have is not a hauntology, right? That we're just on the fumes of, meanings past. And so, okay, sure, but maybe it is. But like, why? Like, what's the reason? I think Brett Weinstein says like there's like metaphorical truth or something like that. But like, why should I care? Like what does it mean to be metaphorically true? And I mean, this is, I guess, the problem with Peterson. Like, okay, these are real, but like in what way? There's just no justification. It's empty.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see some atheists build a society from scratch. That would be worth the watch.
I mean, the kibbutzim in Israel were kind of like that, and they didn't really seem to work out so well.
And they were not. I mean, that's the funny thing. Like the kibbutzim, like.
I mean, the first telos is to build a society, but that can only sustain you for, they can only sustain you for the first level, but then you need something beyond that.
I mean, look, the kibbutzim are called kibbutzim because they had to take a language that existed, and there is, and the language they decided to take was a liturgical religious language, not even like a practical language. So it's like, what exactly are you doing if you claim that you're atheistically creating a commune and you take a religious language as your language?
What religious language did they take?
Hebrew. Hebrew didn't exist.
Oh, no, you mean, okay, that.
Wait, who are the
kibbutzim were the early Zionists. They were very bitterly anti-religious, to the point that some of them made a point, like, on the night of Yom Kippur, you had to be there for the pork dinner they had, or they would kick you out of the kibbutz.
when was this?
The 1920s.
Oh, okay.
30s, yeah.
The starting of that. Okay.
Yeah. Kitty.
This is Tiger Lily. I'm home now, so I no longer have my parents' dog, but I have my cat.
Well, Happy is actually here, but I don't have Happy Cam set up. And Shadow isn't here yet, but she will be. And we'll see how Shadow and if cats and dogs can live together.
Okay, I have a prompt.
All
So
right.
on page 32, it says, almost none of the truths by which we live are provable, and the desire to prove them is based on a monumental confusion between explanation and interpretation. Explanation can be proved, interpretation cannot. Science deals in explanation. So the implication is that when people use science to interpret something without explicitly pointing out a value system which allows them to do it, they are confused or at worst malevolent. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think, touching on this, I think something that's like considered offensive is if you continually psychologize somebody. You sort of break down their meaning and you sort of say, well, actually, the reason you're doing this is because this fire in your head, and you're sort of breaking that person down. And I think you mentioned you said bad, malevolent. What did you say at the end?
Malevolent?
Malevolent. I think that sometimes we can break down people by sort of looking at their parts, and that could be malevolent.
Right. Yeah, but I never thought about this idea of explanation and interpretation.
Yeah.
It was really interesting that Sachs was talking about it.
It's interesting because interpretations can't be proved, but when you're talking about like literature, they can be more or less accurate and more or less supported. Like the goal is always to support any interpretations you're making with like of a text, with arguments from the text. You don't just, if you're doing it honestly, you don't just say whatever you want and like say that it fits.
Right. That makes sense. I guess I wonder why he says cannot be proved. What does he mean exactly by proved? Because, I mean, if I think Maimonides in one of his books mentions, he talks about the image of God and how when the Bible uses all these anthropomorphizing, all these adjectives, not adjectives, but all these like the hand of God and stuff like that, then he said those are metaphors, and the way he proves that, it proves his interpretation is by pointing out how that metaphor exists or that word is used in another part of the text in the Bible. So he does show, like just what you said, he uses something else to support that. But I guess that's not proof. The same thing that.
Well, it's not the same as scientific proof, for sure, but philosophical proof isn't exactly the same as scientific proof either. It's another fudgy word.
Yes, and I would say that none of this compares to mathematical proof, right? Scientific proof is nothing like mathematical proof. So I think that when we read this, I think that Rabbi Sachs is talking about proof in like a empiricist kind of lens.
Yeah.
So I just, every time I read science, I kind of just read empiricism personally.
Hmm.
And I think that also what he's saying here is like, if you say like, why is the water boiling? Science can only say because a certain amount of energy was put into the water and that excites the molecules, causing them to bounce around, causing the water to have a phase change into vapor. But when somebody asks you, why is the water boiling? You say, because I'd like a cup of tea. And so that they're just kind of like on different levels.
It's like a smart-ass teenager response.
What's up?
Like what's up, the ceiling? Or like a dad joke. Sometimes they're very similar. I used to do that way too often in high school. That sort of overly literal, reductionist response to things.
Yeah, because we're seeing that, like, just to bring it back, I think I was going a bit, but you talked a bit about the like documentary hypothesis or something like that, right? It's all happening right now, live, right? Like, you read the literature on the documentary hypothesis, and they're reducing it so much, right? They're just trying to, like, they're taking away all human element out of the Bible entirely, right? And they don't realize that interpretation is actually important because, like, you can have all these facts, but you still need to interpret it historically. You still need to interpret it sociologically. You can't just have the text and like read. Like, I know they don't do this today, but they used to like read every different word and be like, this word is an E source, this word is a J source, this word is a D source, and like you can't do that. You can't just reduce it down. I mean, you may as well just say the Bible is just a bit of paper and ink. You know, it's like, that's where it comes from. You know, it doesn't help anyone.
Question. So what is interpretation in this context?
Providing meaning or deriving meaning from something.
But how? Like, what actually is it?
So let me give you an example. Just that we talked about before about the history thing, right? Prophets believe history was a drama of redemption. Enlightenment thinks it's a narrative of progress. That's interpretation. If I see it correctly, right? They are applying an interpretation to facts, the historical facts. They're integrating them in a certain way.
I'm probably asking a question that really doesn't make sense to what you guys were talking about, maybe. But like, when I think of the word interpretation, I think of historical interpretation, the person that goes around and tells the story of, like you go to a specific site and they yeah, well, and because I started out thinking about interpretation between languages, like because I was thinking of my son, right? And so my question became, is interpretation in that context where you have people taking turns to speak the words of another, you'll often get somebody who's provided with written notes because it's not their opinion that is the interpretation. It's simply the relaying of the words of someone in a different language. So I'm just in this context, when you can think about the various meanings of interpret, what is he actually talking about? Because I'm listening to you guys and I'm kind of thinking I'm not quite sure which context it is.
Well, and I sort of went off into textual interpretation too, which probably confused the conversation a little bit.
No, it's fine.
Um,
I'm just curious because
I think interpretation does very much have to. I mean, obviously, it has to do with meaning. Maybe you could almost just apply it to anything that involves trying to like figure out the meaning of something. Um, it's actually interesting that you bring up the translation sort of connection because when translating between languages, there is a degree of interpretation involved because you have to pick which meaning of a word you're going to emphasize with the word in the new language and things like that.
Mhm.
well, and like even where I was mentioning with when you look at some of the when you get historical sites and whatnot, and they labeled the people that are the tour guides as interpreters.
Mhm.
That kind of fudges the thing up at the top of 32 where he's talking about the difference between explanation and interpretation in that kind of role of that job. It seems there's a little of both going on.
It's okay.
I'm not so sure, Sandy. Can you make just like a sign? Just any sign,
Like, oh, sorry.
like a sign language sign. Just any of them.
Oh, my current favorite?
Yeah, your current favorite.
My current favorite phrase from Chino. Okay, this is my current favorite phrase from Chino, giving an explanation of how you embody something. Okay, so it's an actual whole phrase. Against. Okay, where am I?
Okay, so what did you just say?
Literally or actually?
What did you just say?
I said, Chino, Florida.
Chino, Florida.
No, not Chino. Do you know Florida?
Do you know Florida?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, an explanation of that would maybe be something like, you just did some like funny hand movements, right? But an interpretation of that is, do you know Chino?
And I was
Right?
like,
And so when you go to a historical site, if you just see a tree there or you just see a post, an explanation is here's a post made out of wood. But an interpretation is this is the post that, William Penn hooked his donkey to in, some date.
to a degree, I would agree with you. What I actually signed, mnemonic, whatever the thing is, the word for Emma would know. What I actually signed for Do You Know Florida? Touch, where am I here? Touch, finished, F, Florida.
Mm-hmm. How's that any different?
Well, I could just say, do you know Florida? And that's different. Like, do you know? Because they're different, no.
So is it like, do you know as in have you been to? Is that what the touch means?
Yeah, kind of. But you're not asking it in the context of simply have you been there, but have you, what I said at Chino was like, it's that sense of, in the sense of having taken the experience out into yourself.
See, but I think there's one phrase in the Bible where it says like God is a long of nose in the Hebrew, and it means like wise. I'm pretty sure it's in the.
You have to tell me which verse you are referring to now.
I can't remember where it was. I'll have to find it, but
yes, you do.
I'll try and find it.
I've heard this reference before.
Yes, and that's the like literal translation, but the actual, what you glean from it. And so in some ways, like I think that those are all interpretations. I don't know if you have to be so, narrow in your definition of it.
Well, you just said
a prime example. Okay, bye. Sorry.
You just gave an example. I thought that was your point, Elijah, when you were saying she was just making signs, movements with her hands, the same way that I'm just like making sounds with my mouth and like spitting and blowing wind out of my mouth, but we interpret that as a specific language. So that's interpretation. Is that the interpretation part that you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because language is arbitrary, right? Like you can't. If I was to if you were to find a Rabbi Sachs book, in like 2,000 years from now, and nobody knew English and it was all gone. It's like you couldn't read it. It's just people might not even know what it is, right? I can't remember if Rabbi Sachs even mentions that in the book, right? Like if they just like come across some a book or something like that, and they haven't even invented language or writing. It's like they don't know what it is. It's like, oh, like I think he mentioned like the missionaries who brought the Bible over to the Aztecs, and they just like licked the book and like, what is it? They're like throw it away. They don't know that inside it actually contains history and theology and all these other things that they have no idea. So that's what he means by interpretation. I think that's what he means by interpretation and explanation, because you can have the book, the Bible, the book, just be pages and ink, and like that's all it is, right? The reductionists, and then you can have the interpretation and be like, oh, like we live our lives by listening to what that pink or that paper and ink says, right?
Yeah. The Talmud has something about has a story about Jacob, correct anything if I'm wrong, but the Talmud has a story about a convert that comes to the rabbi, one of the rabbis, and he tells him, convert me, like I believe the written Torah, but I don't believe the oral Torah, so convert me just if I believe the written Torah. And Shammai, this rabbi, takes a stick and hits him and tells him to go away. So the convert goes to Rabbi Hillel, and he asks him, and tells him, I believe the written Torah, I don't believe the oral Torah. So just convert me on that basis. And Hillel says, okay. And he starts teaching him, and he tells him, he shows him the book, and he teaches him, he needs to teach him Hebrew so he can read the written Torah. And he tells this is A, this is B, this is C, this is D, just the language. And then they finish their first class, and then the convert comes back on the second day. And Hillel continues the lesson, and he tells them, this is D, and then he switches the letters, and he's saying, this is D, this is C, this is B, this is A. And the convert is like, didn't we just learn A, B, C, D yesterday, and now it's D, C, B, A? And Hillel says, well, this is the point. You have to rely on me to read the text, right? So there is an interpretation, like even on the written Torah, there's an interpretation that you need to rely on because you're reading the language. So there's
that was my exact point, and yes, that is a famous story from the Talmud. That was at my exact point with the kibbutzim and taking a language, because this idea of like being a self-created human being, it's just so absurdly stupid that the fact we give it credence should like.
Wait, I mean the self-creative is true. But creative is true because that's the idea of repentance, right? So why that makes it
the idea that you can create, you can take, but you can't. It's not ex nihilo,
right?
Because you have no capacity. Like you are not removed, as Pajot puts it. Like this new view from nowhere. Where are you standing to view it from nowhere, right? And it's just evidently self-refuting, I think, to anybody who actually considers it. Go ahead.
No, I just feel like we need some more atheists on this panel, at least. Like, it's not like you're creating it from nowhere. You're just creating it from first principles.
First principles. Give me first principles.
Right, but hold up. Even the rabbi says like it's equal footing. The absurdist and the man of God are on equal footing because they're both going from first principles, right? You can't prove. He says you can't prove that God exists. You also can't really prove that my meaning is correct. Both are going from a leap of faith.
Okay, so, but I'm sorry, but maybe I'm just really tired. But I have zero patience for atheists.
There's an interesting thing with your guys' Tanya discussion that I got to listen to a bit of, with just reading the Torah,
Yeah.
and then reading it with understanding the Talmud.
Right. So, like when.
So there is two different, to some extent, but even that is nested within a religious side of things to begin with, so it's not necessarily the same.
So, okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding. What was the verse? What was the translation of the verse that you said?
I put it in the private chat.
Yeah, I saw. I know that verse, but what did you say in English? Because maybe I misheard you.
Oh, I thought it was wise, but it was slow to anger.
No, but you said lots of noses.
Yeah.
Long of nose.
Long of nose or something.
Oh, long of nose. I thought you said lots of nose, as in N-O. Yeah,
No.
it's like what?
No.
Erech Apayim. Yeah, that is what Erech Apayim literally means. Yes. And so because charon af in Hebrew, anger literally is flaring of the nose. That's when it says God is angry, like God's wrath. It's charon af. It's God's nose is flaring. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd heard that the reason that the metaphor for slow to anger is long of nose is because like old people have bigger noses and old people are also more patient.
Are they though?
Old people are more patient.
Old people.
That is what I was told. I actually forget who told me this though. So it's just I heard this as an explanation of like why you can't do literal word to word Bible translations, and that came up. So
Those don't stop growing.
They do not.
The nose knows, says Gartham. I thought that there was an interesting line on page 33. It's the middle paragraph. One of the most significant framing beliefs is one assumed by science, the idea that the universe is governed by certain immutable laws. As David Hume showed in the 18th century, the truth of this principle can never be proven. The fact that certain phenomena have occurred a million or a billion times does not entail that they will do so the next time. Bertrand Russell illustrated this by life as it seems to a turkey. Every day it is fed by its owner. Being a scientific turkey, it concludes that this is the rule of nature. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, it discovers the difference between probability and certainty. This is the so-called problem of induction. The so-called problem of induction is insolvable. Science rests on the faith that, in Einstein's words, God does not play dice with the universe. It cannot be proven, but it works.
Scientific turkey.
And then he mentions later on, there are many unprovable things. Is there really a world out there? Are there other minds? Do we have free will? Things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was like my last note that I have that we didn't touch on. I just heard somebody talk about all these. I'm gonna try to connect it. Like when he was talking about another paradox, another Zeno's paradox. If somebody also listened to Tanya, I think it's a Zeno paradox. The paradox of motion. Like Zeno proved, and again, I'm not academic, so you can correct me on this, but he proved or he had 3 different proofs for how things don't really move. And he couldn't be disproven mathematically for like 1,000 years. But obviously, as we experience the world, we can see that things are moving. So it's not like we said, okay, things are not moving, and that's just it. We just took that as like, okay, that is what he found at that moment, and we just need to until we figure out how to prove it otherwise, because that's our experience. We'll wait for that proof. I don't remember though how I wanted to connect it.
Fraudwith says, before you can get from destination A, you must get to the half point. Yeah, this is in Zeno's paragraph.
Yes. Yep,
Mhm.
All right, anything else?
Well, I guess the only other thing is like that he gives a nice example of like an Epicurean, which kind of reminds you of like the Sam Harris position, maybe like a straw man of it, but but reduce suffering and increase pleasure, but maybe just like reduce suffering. But that's on page 34. Which is another, I guess, just an alternative to, if we talk about the will to power, or the will like the alternative to the meaning outside the system. That would be one alternative to that. Okay, so if not that, the first principles will be reduce suffering, increase pleasure, or just reduce suffering, and then from there we can build it. And that's kind of like the Epicurean position. That I don't know if there is anything else to like build on top of it.
I was gonna say, talking about, because I think the Epicureans have like a good idea on things. I just think it sort of flattened morality in a certain sense. And in 4 of the book, I sort of see him predicting that. So he says, if God doesn't exist, we will, I believe, be unable to sustain the concept of human dignity. We will lose a certain kind of politics, the politics of the common good. We will find ourselves unable to hold on to a shared morality, and morality must be shared if it's to do what it's always done, bind us together into community of shared principle and value. Marriage, desecrated, will crumble and children will suffer, and we will find it impossible to confer meaning of life as a whole. The best we will be able to do is see our lives as a personal project, a private oasis in the desert of meaningless. And I think that, at least with the idea of like only looking at the good, we're only going to look at the good of ourselves, right? We're only going to focus on what we're doing. And I think he's pretty prophetic in this statement. It seems like a lot of what our politics today is very much not the idea of the common good. It's the idea of what I want, me.
That's all you're left with.
Yeah.
Right.
What year did he write this?
2011.
Yeah, the polity.
Also, do I have background noise or am I okay?
You have background.
You have background noise.
Yeah.
Ben?
I just want to say, only a true DDGer could say Epicureanism was pretty good. So,
Oh, DGG, rise up.
oh my God,
What's
No
DDG?
way. This is a weird
What is DDG?
Destiny's kind.
Oh,
yeah, DDG.
I have no clue what you guys are talking about.
Good, it's good.
it's the Dalaban. What are you talking about?
Uh-oh, really?
He's an internet streamer. I forgot. You.
I'm an old man, and you kids need to get off my lawn.
We interrupted you, Ben. You were going to say something.
I don't remember. Well, No, I was just gonna say, yeah, like the polity conferring, like the public having to abide by the individual, right? And we keep also just like to kind of like the theme of, I feel like the theme of our discussion in terms of like the Epicurean, the atheist, of being able, okay, you get to a ground floor of some kind of ground floor, and then you can come up with some first principle, but it doesn't scale. I mean, there's other issues with it, but it definitely doesn't scale. Like you can build a kibbutz, and your ethos is to build a commune, but beyond the building of the commune, once you've built something, then what else is moving you ahead? Or with the individual, you can worry about your own safety, you can worry about not suffering, but then how do you deal with everybody else, and how do you move past that?
What does it mean to not suffer?
I mean, that's another completely different, yeah, completely other issue, right? But because suffering is needed for some things, but yeah.
What you were explaining there, I'm curious. How does what you were explaining there relate to the use of the word free in the book and the concept of the word freedom these days? Do you know what I mean?
If I remember correctly, he said something like freedom. We have, this is kind of drawn from like other things, but we have like today we think of freedom as like libertarian free will, right? Like you can do whatever, like there's there's choices, there's an unlimited amount of choices, sort of, right? In like, or they kind of, some people might mock it, you know, I mean, like spooky uncaused cause, right? Like your will can somehow from nowhere cause you to do something, right? Like this is the sort of like libertarian free will we have in the current society, and I guess some people debate over it. But I think what he's kind of talking about here is more like freedom, like we might use the term like freedom from sin, right? So we're talking about like a different type of freedom that's not, it's not related to the choice, to being able to exercise any option that you want. It's related more to the freedom to exercise the best option, or to exercise the option that leads to the greatest good. And I think that's like one of the debates that needs to happen about freedom in our current context. If that makes sense.
Kind of, because when I can't remember where it came up early in the book, but talking about like we've kind of nudged around free will, like sort of that ability given to us to act somehow within the framework that was provided. But these days, when, you know, like when I hear people talking freedom, or when I see like today walking to work, you know, like Elijah asked me to sign something. Well, it's kind of same thing as I'm waiting to cross the road, and there's this massive, large van-like truck with decorated across the front with something that's I didn't even catch all the elements of it, but the word freedom is like blazoned across the front of it. But whereas it talks about freedom, which to me indicates some kind of open, like looking to the horizon, there's depth to something. Instead, this truck is like barreling down on the light because it's not going to give way to something. And those to me aren't really the same thing, and they don't intersect.
Yeah, I think we do have a bit of a bit of a strange. Like, yeah, I think freedom is it's an interesting idea because, like you said, like that seems like the truck with labeled freedom. It's almost a nowadays a political word, right? That where we want you might hear some people talk about freedom to do X, right? We want freedom to do this. We want freedom to live our lives in whatever way, but we don't really want that, do we? Like nobody really wants freedom to live any way that they want because they always put restrictions on it. Right? If you ask someone like, are you like if you ask like a libertarian or you ask someone maybe on the left and you ask them like, what freedom? What do you mean by like allowing people to live their life the way they want to live? They'll always add, but not to harm others or themselves. Sure, right? Like somehow we see that as being a higher form of freedom than just unlimited options, do whatever. Like there's no restriction whatsoever. Like for some reason we still think that freedom, that you can't have unlimited freedom. Right? You're almost freer with restrictions. And it's a paradox of it, but
Yeah, I like Vervaeke's. He was talking about it like this. He has this new that I heard about like freedom from and freedom to. It's two separate kinds of, it's two categories, and I like how that connects also like Exodus. I also listened to the Exodus seminar, but they're also like this insight, this point about freedom from Egypt for the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and they're free, but it's freedom to do something specific. So it's a constraint. It's an enabling constraint. So there's two. It's kind of like this. Freedom is an ideology. If you just look at one side of it, is an ideology. It's just one side of the idea, as opposed to no. It's freedom from and freedom to. Like you need to, like you said, constrain it. In a meaningful way, and that's kind of like the Exodus story, right? Because let my people go so that they can worship God in the desert.
Yeah, I'm kind of hovering around that. So is that like when he gets to the last page of the chapter on 38, where he's talking about the meaning of, you mentioned it, or somebody mentioned it at the beginning, how the meaning of a system lies outside of the system, like in my example with the truck. If freedom is that something that's wielded by the driver of the truck, then basically takes me back to the page where we were talking about homicide. So the logical conclusion is, if I want the ultimate freedom, there's only me in the world and only I matter. And that crumbles quickly because suddenly there's nobody to help provide your food. There's nobody to engage with. There's nothing, so where does the meaning actually come from if we live out the modern sense of freedom to the extreme, I guess is what I'm wondering.
I'm going to let people answer that question, but we're coming upon the hour, and
sorry.
When we'll wind up, Elijah should tell us what we're doing next.
I've actually been reading a lot of stuff about this lately because there's this new website I've been following called Fair Disputations that's like an alliance between Catholic feminists and some other feminists. Like Louise Perry and Mary Harrington are also on there. And they talk a lot about this concept of responsibility and freedom for, and how it relates to motherhood specifically, and how motherhood just doesn't fit into the libertarian, individual paradigm.
Yeah, I mean that's what the Epicurean, it says don't get married, don't make kids. So that's the quote that Sachs says, because it's not gonna, you're not gonna reap the benefit during your lifetime, so why do it? And you're gonna suffer from it, especially if you're a woman. So just don't do it. But that's the idea of don't suffer, maximize pleasure.
Mhm.
And also for the freedom that you mentioned, Sandy, sounded a lot like the nihilism, will to power that we discussed. Like it's my will, it's freedom. I can do whatever I want. There's nothing else. I can maximize my freedom, ultimate freedom. No other cars in the road, no people on the street. So I can do whatever I want. But obviously that's not true because there are cars, there are people, there are traffic lights and all that stuff.
I was going to say it's probably ironic that they were driving in the lanes and probably used their indicators to change lanes, were around the speed limit, and they had bumpers on their car and all of the regulations. But freedom.
Okay, Elijah, you want to wrap it up?
All right. Well, we went for a good long time. So thank you guys all for coming. Let's read chapter 2 and chapter 3. That's going to be In Two Minds and Diverging Paths. Make sure to go on the Discord and vote for a time. It can be the same bat time, same bat channel, or something else. All right.
It was good.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
You have a worldwide viewership with Ryan over here too. So let's continue. See you guys in 2 weeks.
I
Thank you.
love the broadcast.